Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, good afternoon. French Embassy in Nepal, Alliance Française and BID Management are very happy to welcome you today to our annual talk show, The Night of Idea. What is the Night of Idea first? The Night of Idea is a global event. It takes place every year on January 30th and everywhere in the world, including today in Kathmandu. The topic changes every year and is being discussed worldwide with many variations. Usually organized in the evening, that's why we call it Night of Ideas. The goal is to celebrate the streams of ideas between countries, culture, topics, and generations. It gives us the opportunity to listen to the ones who contribute to bring more ideas to their field and to take part in the discussion about the main issues of our times. Today, we had to make a choice, so we decided to leave you to think about spiritual and religious aspects of the topic, and we decided to focus more on mental health and environmental issues, preservation of memory and heritage, and the importance of culture and identity. This year is the 70th anniversary of the ascent of Annapurna by the French climber Maurice Herzog and his French and Nepali team in June 1950. I would like to give my special thanks to BID Management, namely Sujiv Shakya and Sadiq Shah Singh, here, who kindly accepted to be our partner and to curate this event. I would like also to thank our moderator and our panelists. To conclude now, I would like to invite on stage the moderator, Lina Daral, along with the panelists, so Alok Tuladar, Bindu Bandari, Jagannath Lamit-Chane, and Swasti Rajbandari Kayasta. I thank all of you for being here, and I wish all of you fruitful discussions and also a very enjoyable moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. I couldn't be more excited to start a discussion about action, as you said, Aina. And it feels really rare to speak to people who are responding to this time where we have so much information about what's happening in the world with action and transformation, and who are actively trying to enact change. So I think that's where we need to start, because response is an outcome of individual choice. So I think the first layer we need to peel here when we talk about being alive is what it means to be alive and respond to this call to action as an individual. So Binduji, because climate crisis features so centrally in the foreground of this urgency and for the need of action, maybe we could start with you. Why do you think, despite having decades of science and empirical evidence about this issue, why do you think we haven't really responded on a global level and an individual level with action?
Thank you so much, Lina-ji. So, as just introduced, I am Bindu, and I am climate change campaigner and science communicator. Why hasn't been there enough action to the speed and scale that is needed? I think how people see things, especially seeing it from the climate change angle of the climate change and the activism, is that oftentimes what we think is what is more important, individual change in the behavior or the systemic change. And how people treat it is as if they competed with each other. What will my one individual action make a difference in this whole system? I think that is deep-rooted in so many individuals, which is one of the cause of all these agonies when you talk about climate change. How do we generate the hope? I think people are being more pessimistic. I think they feel threatened, but then that threat somehow, somewhere suppresses the feeling and that hope to take meaningful action. And also to add that it's not just about the action. Coming to this day and being this decade declared as the decade of action to deliver the global goals, we should make sure that our actions are actually meaningful. because out there are so many actions and solutions, but not all solutions are true solutions that can address the problems in meaningful way.
You're contributing, to empirical evidence about the issue, but what made you go from your little silo of this empirical evidence towards going beyond that and campaigning? What triggered you to go beyond?
So when I first started climate change campaigning, I actually come from a veterinary science background. So when I was doing my undergraduate studies, I was studying medical science, and I was doing the surgery, and then all of a sudden, I wanted to get involved in something extracurricular activities. Like when I started my campaigning, I found more and more reasons to stick to it. And not just the threat, not just only to make contribute something meaningful, but actually I saw opportunities to not just learn myself, but then to disseminate the knowledge that I have to the wider audiences, to the people who most need it, and also to the people who know it but are not taking enough action.
Jagannath ji, why do you feel like this issue has been overlooked continually? I mean, you've been writing for over a decade now about this issue, and you've been vocal about how it feels like nothing has changed. So why do you think this has happened, and how have we let this escalate, and who's responsible?
Thank you, Lina ji. Let me start with my own personal reflection first. Actually, I started suffering from childhood mental disorder when I was 10 years old. And at that time, I was clueless. And I had no idea how to share the feelings of being suicidal, feel lonely, isolated, and demotivated. And that was that kind of symptoms didn't only remain as a symptom, but that gradually started to affect my physical health, my social relation, my friendship, and that kind of the enormous, the personal and the social suffering has been the part of the silence, even individual level, in the family level, in the social educational level. So in Nepal also, we hear one term, Mareko Juni. It means I used to relate with that term. I was alive in front of the people, but I was dying inside me. And there was no way, there was no avenues to express those things. There was no an environment to seek help. And in society, there was belief, still that belief is deeply rooted, mental health problems are incurable. And that kind of the struggle, ups and down, and actually it has philosophical meaning also, for people who struggle with those conditions, where they can't give physical evidence, there is no thing there is no the physical form of suffering that I can present to other people, but people have to suffer all the time. And this kind of deeply confusing, frustrating, and the highly terrifying experiences actually encouraged me.
I want to point out that what I find really interesting about this panel is that they all started in different fields. As we're talking about what it means to be alive as an individual and come to action, how you break from your silo, respond to your personal experience, and actually take action, even if that means moving away from your original path.
I'm Alok. I'm a part-time documentary filmmaker and full-time cultural preservation activist. I was already interested in photography since my early teenage years. And because I was doing a lot of photography together with my professional career, I got very involved in the documentation of restoration of cultural heritage monuments. And that was a tipping point for me where I think maybe unconsciously changed my entire career from IT into cultural awakening. And now I think I am fully alive because I know I'm doing what I was always meant to be, and I wish I had done this 30 years ago.
I'd like to blend two things here. I come from a very unusual family, a Nepali or a rather Asian family. I was the much awaited daughter of my parents. They waited for 6 sons to have me. So to be alive, in every way was very important for me. And during the times when I was born in the 70s, all parents' aspirations for their children was to either become a doctor or an engineer. And that was exactly what my parents wanted from me. And fortunately, I was a brilliant student, so they wouldn't expect anything else. And in my grade 12, my mother, for my high school, at that time, we had to choose our, field of subject in high school. So my mother, she compelled me into taking science, and I did take science, but it was never my interest. But she never ever let go of her dream of me having to be a doctor. And till now I'm in my 40s, until a few years, and she's in her 80s, until a few years ago, she kept telling me that if only you had been a doctor or an engineer, your life would have been so much easier. You wouldn't have to be running all around. And finally, now when she's 80 and I'm crossed 40, she has accepted, and she says, "This is what you like, isn't it? You must be enjoying running around all the places." And I say, "Yes, that is what I like. That's what makes me alive."
In the context of being alive, like when I published my first article in 2008 about the whole experience and upbringing with childhood mental disorder, that day, like, I felt like I can live now. Because that day I released the pressure to hide something for the rest of the life, that the societal expectation in general, today is also. Like, I meet hundreds of people having this kind of situation, and they are honest to me because they know what I have gone through, but they never can be open or honest to themselves and to the society also.
I want to move to the next layer of what it means to be alive, which I think is being a part of a community. And Alokji, I think it's a good place to start with you with this topic, because your work really points to how, when we look at the future solutions, we also should consider the survival of our past, our heritage, our culture. What kind of lessons can we bring from the past and to face this uncertainty and issues of climate change, issues of mental health? How can we look for the past for wisdom, and why should we ensure that its survival?
I'm with the Occupy Tunikel movement, which some of you might have heard about. It's really about preserving and studying the way our civilization has evolved over the centuries, over the millennia, over 2 millennia in Kathmandu Valley. In the past few decades, countries like ours have been really trying to keep up with the so-called development of the Western world, where we are totally forgetting where we come from and how we have really been developed for so many centuries, where sustainability is one of the key things that was part of our own civilization. This is where we, I think, did not realize our own roots, our own wisdom, our own knowledge, and our own indigenous technologies, and just blindly copied the West.
I want to pick your brain as well, because you deal with how this manifests into art as well. What do you attribute to our forgetfulness, our amnesia when it comes to culture? Is it just Westernization? Is it something else? What is it?
When I reflect back, I think that what we, being Nepalis and belonging to the eastern part of the world, we want to be modern, but what we try to do is we try to ape the West. The West, there's nothing wrong with the West, but then the West, they have a different culture, and we have a different culture. And culture is so much rooted in, basically, most importantly, in the topography of the region that you belong to. There is no harm in modernization, but then the difference is, the biggest problem is that we forget the difference between modernization and westernization. There is a very thin line, or I see a very thick line, but then people mistake that for the other, and there is the major problem. As Nepalis, How much of our culture do we value? How much of our culture do we understand? How much of our culture do we know? And I think the most important thing to be alive, getting back to the topic, is to be able to feel comfortable in who you are and to value who you are. And when we delve into our history, our culture, there we see our identity.
What do we do with these youth who are dislocated geographically from Nepal, this larger diaspora that is now becoming more prominent in Nepal's survival because we are coming back? What do we do with them?
I was totally clueless about Nepali culture. And when I started writing my article and started interviewing our traditional artists in these three mediums, I realized the value of the importance, the depth, the value, the beauty, the intricacy, the history that we uphold. So I think it is most important for our youth to experience. Even if you are living here, you should experience, because most of our youth living here, they are constantly engaged in their mobiles and in their laptops, that they live in a virtual world. I think they should be more in the field to experience the society that we have, the topography of our country.
I think transfer of skills is so much important. Oftentimes we see that we see people making remarks that we have limited opportunities in Nepal. I don't think that is correct, because there are ample opportunities. Where the gap lies is that we haven't been able to tap into those opportunities. I think people who have gained those skills and knowledge from foreign land can maybe do their best in transferring those skills and knowledge so that gap is bridged. I see that very valuable and the need of this time for a country like ours.
Jagannath ji, because it was mentioned that youth in general just tend to live in bubbles, you're using social media, because you mentioned that, as a tool to reach out to youth and talk about an issue that is not really discussed in youth communities. What is the power of that tool, but what is also the danger?
Mainly like in social media, the main opportunity that I saw was the opportunity like to interact directly with the audience. For instance, if I write an article and want to be published in the newspaper, it's not like 100% sure that my article is get published all the time. And if I get published, I should wait like minimum 1 week to like 2-3 weeks also. But in social media, if I feel something deeply, I can make like short video, or I can write text, and I can immediately start interaction, and I can start engaging my audience. So that is the main thing. But social media itself like becoming a great threat to the psychological well-being, even like the physical well-being. We are knowingly or unknowingly being addicted to the mobile technology, which definitely is affecting our creativity, the productive time. So, and that is overlooked platform also, because we discuss lots of other issues. And we are not yet discussing the issues where our youngsters spend their most of the time.
I want anyone to reflect on what it means to be part of a generation that responded to these issues with inaction and apathy.
I can very much identify with what you just said, because when I was a youth, that is where I felt my earlier generations, my father's generation, grandfathers, maybe one more generation before that, were the ones who contributed in a large way to the present state of our heritage, our cultural decline. In all of the work that I do, I always target the youth, and that is where I also use social media very, very much. But of course, social media has its own upsides and downsides. But getting the youth engaged in a way where they are attracted to smartphones, modern technologies, their interest at a certain age of until they're 25 is at least very shallow. They have no time or patience to read long articles on the newspaper or to watch television. They want 280 character posts on Twitter, or they want to see Instagram stories that only exists for 24 hours. So by leveraging all of those technologies that are available to us today, I think we can very easily get into their mindset.
You work so closely with youth in your campaign, so I'm just curious, like, how do you relate to this on a global but also in a local level?
Yeah, so I myself being young people, young youth, how I say is that oftentimes we use the phrase, users recall that youth are the future. And the way we have placed youth is that they will come and do action, but in the future. They can make noise now, but they will take action. They will be in the position to make an influence in the future, which I strongly oppose to in every platforms that I go to. And being a youth and relating it back to the feeling of being alive, what it means is to take action at the present. I mean, like being present now for this moment and dealing with the situation now with the innovations that are present now. Of course, not forgetting our past and looking forward to the future. But then, as a young people, how do we root our actions to the present is so much important. Our participation in the democratic process, I think that is hugely missing, which is kind of lacking youth to tap into those opportunities which exist in the present, and they don't need to wait for the future to come where they can make an actual influence.
So if you could talk about what was special about that moment and what we can learn about that moment in our history.
The biggest lesson for me from the Guti Bill movement was that what I learned from, the most important lesson I learned from there is if you want to, if something really touches your sentiments, then you give up everything else. You don't mind giving up your office and blocking the road all day and then going on a mass protest, because it has to hit you where it really matters. It has to hit your feelings. And that, in a way, for me, is being alive.
Your culture is something that changes every time. It has a very dynamic nature. It is not something that is static. And with the changes in time and technology, people have to change. But there are certain ethical values and certain traditional values that we should maintain. And my subject, what I teach is museum studies, which deals a lot with cultural heritage. And there is where that is what I really enjoy, because I think the knowledge of our culture and our heritage is something that gives us our identity. And so we all, irrespective of age and geographical boundaries, we should all be aware of our culture, our heritage. And besides teaching how I disseminate my knowledge and how I would like to spread the knowledge of our of culture and heritage is through exhibitions which I curate, and I really love to curate exhibitions because it helps me express my thoughts and to share the culture of our country, whether it is in terms of relations with various different countries or just our own traditional art or contemporary art. And besides that, even through articles, I share.
This is about the last layer of what it means to be alive that wasn't really covered, and that's the ecological layer. What does it mean to be a human in the larger ecosystem, and like, given that the climate crisis is anthropogenic, it's human-induced. What does it mean to be part of that species that has already caused the loss of survival for so many other species?
As we say, climate change is poses existential threat. And being in this generation, I think what we have, the opportunity is to make choices in almost every field. And my call to action is that make sure that we make choice, not just at the individual level, but as a in the larger picture of being a member of the society of a country and this global arena. Make sure that the choices you make adds value to the larger moment that we are in.
This is for the overall panel. Why do you think it is that it took us this long to get to talk about our role as humans, as a species? Why do you think it only matters, life only matters when it's about humans?
I'd like to add, oftentimes how we see is we see ourselves as individual, which is so true, but then we see ourselves so apart from the larger system that we are a part of. I mean, we are a part of this larger system where we interact with each other, and these interactions like take this course of action which have several impacts and the repercussions. So not seeing ourselves just as an individual, but then we are like having this broader mindset of, yes, we are individual, but within this larger system where our interactions have different kind of actions and repercussions. I think that is what we need to be mindful of.
I want to go to respond to your earlier question about like the ecological thing, environmental thing. And like we can ask people like who experience loneliness or alienation, like how much importance like the environment can play to change their whole experiences. So from like when I like started the mental health campaign, the most important thing is the realization, like rather than me as a person, like my interaction with the external element, external factors, how important role the external institutions, the agencies play to maintain my health. Institutions are important, like not only from the environmental factors, but from the public health aspect also, like to experience or even like to see meaning in my life. I can see in isolation. I should feel part of the larger system.
So my question would be, like since you are the campaigner and working with the youths, I heard, what are some of the things you are facing in terms of actually bringing the awareness, not only awareness, the change in the behavior of the youth, that they can actually address this climate change, environmental issue, and overall sustainable development? What are some of the concerns you have that we have not been doing it right to protect our environment and climate? Thank you.
First, talking about the challenges, yes, I'm a campaigner and I work with youth, like youth from Nepal, from the grassroots to the youth in the sphere of this global climate politics. And what I have seen, the main challenge is making people feel that the issues related to them at individual level. Of course, thinking ourselves as a part of this larger system, but then how this kind of issues impact them, this is related to their individual life. So the challenge is that with many of the people who are in this field is that maybe in a way they don't use the power of the data and the science to actually convince people with the facts and figures, but in a relatable way, and bridge that gap between science and policy and public in a meaningful way, in an understandable and accessible language. And the next is about the intergenerational gap. I think what can be done by the generation for maybe before us to actually make sure that our generation exists with meaning and gives hope to the generation that is to come is that really encouraging them to not put any boundaries on the potentials that they have.
My question is that if we have to face this challenge of climate change and more sustainable living, how as a developing economies like you and me make a compromise between our aspiration of affluence and the sacrifices that we have to make, especially as our generation?
It depends on how we define what the prosperity is. What the prosperity is in terms of economy, like how we evaluate the success and how we evaluate the prosperity, like in what terms do we coin it. For example, if I say like not using a flight to go to my hometown Chitwan, if I'm using a public bus, if I think that is a compromise, if someone thinks that is a compromise, I would say that is their mindset. That is, I don't view it as a compromise. So I think the point here is like, how do we define success? How do we define prosperity? Is it only in the terms of GDP? Is it really like Bhutan is doing gross national happiness? How do we actually define what success is and what prosperity is? Yes, there is very disproportionate consumption and the impact. The tragedy of commons is that those who will be hit first by the crisis is the people like us who are in the front lines who have contributed less, which I think in fact should make us more inspired and encouraged to take action.
I'm going to ask the final question to the panel. What is your advice to ensure that this night of ideas turns into days and days of action? Like, what is one tangible action point that we could go home with?
I'd like to suggest to everyone that it's not enough that you just, the younger people go through Instagram posts, or the older people watch television shows about how glorious our culture was and how it can actually help develop a sustainable urban plan for our future. But I encourage you to go out and actually experience what is remaining, how city life revolves around the living heritage, how the monuments have been built. So please go out and experience all this yourself. It is very much alive today. You can be part of that living by spending an hour or two going through the inner cities of Kathmandu, Patan, Bhaktapur, Kirtipur.
I would like to ask all of you here, whether you are Nepalis or non-Nepalis, that Nepal, we still belong to a place that we have a living heritage, continuing with the same that Alok says, where we can still touch our heritage. They are not locked, they are not behind bars, behind glass panels. And so enjoy your heritage, learn it, respect it, and feel it, experience it, and you will realize your own value.
My message to everyone is that never perceive mental health separate from the physical health. It's one and it's same. And like in terms of shaping our aging, youthfulness, productivity, or whatever meaningful life we want to live, our emotions play central role. But we don't want to talk about it. And I request to be open about your feelings.
Yeah, relating to the theme that we have, being alive and being born in the generation of crisis, cultural crisis, ecological crisis, and whatnot, I think what will be my call to action for day-to-day basis is that make sure that the opportunities you are provided of, you add meaning to every opportunity that you get. Like you have so many choices, again, re-stressing what I said earlier, that you have so many choices out there. Make sure that the choice you make is meaningful and you are mindful of what choice you are making.
Thank you so much. I think you've taken us all on like an important reflective exercise. We think about what it means to be alive all the time, but we don't really take action on it. So I think you've given us lessons of action, and it's an important place to start, I think.